Alright, hi. It's been a while since I've released a video, but I think it's been worth the wait, so stay tuned and watch the whole thing. So while visiting France recently, I went to Versailles. This is me standing in the Hall of Battles, and this is the favorite painting of mine in all of the Hall of Battles that I'd seen online before, but never in person. This was a gigantic painting on canvas by Delacroix, impressive in its size, but I really had to zoom in on a couple areas I thought were kind of... And then I saw some small paintings that were about the same scale size, figure-wise, as the painting that I'll be working on in this video. This painting is only about 20 by 30 centimeters, and I think it's fantastically done. It's by David Wilkie. Then at the end of our long day at the Louvre, we finally got to the Northern European section, which I wish I had gone to first so we had more time there, but it was the same thing. Every time I see that work in person, it just does something to me that a lot of the big paintings on canvas just don't. And then maybe you can tell by my somewhat befuddled expression how I felt when I got there. This was not an original Bruegel, but the artist that copied it did a damn fine job. And I'd never seen this artist before, but it really grabbed me, even though, of course, the proportions are not as realistic. There's something about it, it's just incredible. And then I finally made it to Ghent, Belgium, where I saw Jan van Eyck's altarpiece for the first time in person, and it reminded me that if you're going to work in the type of style where you can walk right up to the painting and it takes you into another world, with every tiny little detail, it's just going to take forever. I relate to this kind of painting so much. And so this episode is dedicated to those painters like me who were born in the wrong century and know that it is not the size of the painting that counts, it's the size of the idea. So this is how I've started many other paintings in the past. I'm just working on a 11 by 11 inch aluminum panel. It happens to be in a frame here. I usually don't work like that. Drawing first, of course. It's not aluminum, it's actually covered with many thin layers of gesso. And here I'm just like going through and making as many corrections as I can before I actually apply paint. Speaking of paint, this is raw umber and lead white, which I usually don't use, but I thought I would try it again. So I've always been a big advocate of keeping the darkest shadow areas quite flat. Some people use the term transparent, meaning a thin layer. Either way, it just means that you're not going to get actual texture in the shadow areas, making it look more realistic and saving that texture for the midtones and highlights. There are some modern era painters that claim to not care about that at all, but if you look closely at certain painters that have a lot of abstract stuff around the edges, when they work on something like the eyes in a portrait, they do this too, they just maybe don't admit it. And so my apologies, this is not a how-to video per se where you get every single step. It's like 1, 2, skip a few, and all of a sudden the next clip is like underpainting layer finished in that area. If you'd like to see actual long-form content where it goes like step by step, just let me know in the comments and that will encourage me to do that. So this is my first application of color, and this is technically still what I would consider to be underpainting. I'm going to paint over it again. This is a fast-drying yellow that is made from cobalt yellow, and I think I'm still using flake white here, that's why I've got the gloves. Here I am applying the fast-drying palette still. Just filling in all of the areas, kind of a block in a way that gets me a lot closer to the finish line, at least 50% or 60% to the final color layer. That way when I'm applying the final color layer, I can see it relative to what's already there. This was my first attempt at a really quick glaze, something that approximated a flesh tone, but of course it was way too red, had to be adjusted, as things always do. Here I am using some of the exact same greens that I'd already had mixed for the rest of the background area, which just makes perfect sense, of course, because it unifies the colors and the appearance. So continuing to do what is still underpainting, just laying things out compositionally. It's a chance to kind of draw and also apply color at the same time, which is related to a term I've used in past videos, ébauche, borrowed from French, which basically means a quick preliminary underpainting, usually in color. So a few days after those layers have dried, I am now mixing stand oil with linseed oil, and with a clean brush I'm oiling out to work into these areas with what's supposed to be the final color layer now. This is, to me, a totally different treatment. To work this way, it's kind of like treating it like a sacred surface. I really want the entire surface to not rely on varnish in the end to bring back that look of the rich colors in the dark areas. So you can see in the glare, as I'm always checking what's happening. Now as I approach what is supposed to be the final color layer, I am applying the lighter paint thicker than the darker paint, generally because it has to make up for the lack of opacity in those areas, and I want it to be very bright looking and very opaque. Instead of placing texture in the surface arbitrarily in random areas, I'm always thinking about the actual thickness of the paint and how thick it needs to be in those particular parts of the grayscale. Here, as I apply this paint in the final color layer, it's really nice to have this underpainting in color so that it gives me something to compare to as I'm working and adjusting it. A lot of these hues and parts of a sky like this are actually very subtle, so it's really nice to be able to see that. So now would be a good time to bring up bracing the hand, which I'm usually doing at this point in the painting. It's really just a way of making things are steady when you're working on small details in this kind of a situation. Obviously this piece I'm using like a clear triangular ruler that I've got set up against the dry surface. This surface has lead in it, so that's why I'm doing this, but usually I just use this, which is a curtain rod kind of a setup. I've got notches that I cut into it so I can adjust the distance of the curtain rod and of course the height as well. Extremely flexible that way. I've got another setup where I usually have either a small painting or a drawing in my same studio in another location. Can you believe there's actually people that think it's cheating to brace the hand? Who are these people? And back to painting. So for this entire section of the video, I'm going to try to keep some of the footage, or most of the footage, in real time without speeding it up, just like lots of small clips of it. When I watch this back, I'm reminded of how I paint very differently when I'm filming on camera, partially because I'm trying to get a lot of really close detail, and so my camera lens is literally like less than 20 or 15 centimeters away from the surface of the painting. So it's kind of hard to position myself exactly the way that I do when I'm working. But like 99.9% of the actual work that is done to make this painting finished in this way is done off camera. So I've kind of got a YouTube identity crisis, I guess I would admit. I'm working in a way that could easily produce many 10+ hour videos, long form content. That's kind of more my jam, but I'm influenced by the algorithm and, just the short attention spans of the general public to make really quick, short content, but yet still this video is like over 20 minutes long. So let me know if there's any demand for that, if you'd like to see that. Of course, I'm doing this for free right now, and my channel is not monetized. So, in order to do that, I've started a Buy Me a Coffee, which is I think it's linked in my YouTube description on my main page, so you can find it there. It's a way to encourage me to help make more stuff, and then eventually provide long-form videos and instructional things that are more step-by-step that you could purchase. So, yeah, that's the only time I'm going to say that. You've probably gathered by now that I'm not the type to say, like and subscribe, smash that, all that stuff. This type of painting in general is really it's like it's against the grain of what our culture has done to our perception of time. That kind of pressure to make things, it's quantity over quality. And the entire so this area where I'm trying to make the leaves look like they're really reflecting the bright sun is a perfect place to illustrate the principle of soft light. It's where, you're finding the brightest point and then kind of working down in the grayscale hierarchy of values instead of just like slapping on paint bit by bit. To make it look like it's glowing, even when you're up close to the painting, just takes so much longer. Hiding every brush mark, all that kind of thing, instead of the more contemporary, popular, modern era way of just kind of slapping on paint. So, you can look really realistic that way from a distance, but when you get up closer, like those paintings just lose me. I don't feel enchanted by them because I know how it works, and it doesn't work for me. So now that I have about 32.7% of the paint finished, more or less, I'm deciding what area to go down into next. Working across is probably going to be the way to go because that way I can finish a session and then go back into it the next day if I don't have one really long alla prima session. I think that's always the challenge that people have when they're trying to figure out how to paint in many separate sessions and still keep it wet. This method I've been using with the stand oil is the way to do that, plus also covering it with clove oil if I have to go away for more than a day or two. So as I'm working down into this area, I'm reminded of how the paint has to be pretty opaque in order for it to really feel finished. This is more of like a smooth, potential flat color that I'm changing into a bit of a gradient rather than the trees above, which are easier to work in separate sessions. So now I'd like to take a second to talk about the open palette. So what I applied there at first was supposed to be like a highlight that would work without being worked in too much to the surface, but of course it didn't. And so as we do in alla prima painting, we just adjust as we go and we keep adjusting. But I think maybe it's a hangover from the 20th century, like all of the painting methods that people are being taught from that era when you finally had in the 1800s all of these aluminum paint tubes with new pigments available, and people just want to like do things quicker, right? So you're mixing with the brush as you go from the pure pigments around the edge. I really like to make a couple of premixes and then work that into the open palette as well. To me, it just feels like a no-brainer because you can mix so much more quantity of paint with the palette knife instead of just mixing it with the brush. And so to finish this area, I just blocked in that water reflection in the standard way that you would, just putting all the right colors in the right spots. And then I sweeped it sideways with a horizontal brush marks with a soft brush. Then I had to add another like flower in the distance because compositionally it just looked kind of awkward there. The spaces were too even. And I added another big lily pad in the foreground and so on and so on. Now, I just thought I would zoom in on this part. Hopefully I don't get too salty about this, but this is one thing that is different about imaginative realism than standard traditional, like only painting from life kind of painting. I just can't get painterly in an area like this because this is only like 4 centimeters across, and this is a symbol from a previous painting. So I have to paint it in small, tiny detail in order to make it clear what I'm actually trying to show here. So this is another section where I'm dealing with thoughts about what to oil out now. What do I have time to finish in this session? Of course, we always want to finish everything when it's wet together, but then every part leads into the next part. So today I'm deciding to like do the foot and then oil out really carefully up to the very edge. And then here again, of course, I zoomed ahead. So this is just your incentive to let me know if you want long form content. What am I doing here? I don't know. I'm just I'm just doing what I do. I like finish all the midtones and then try to build it up so that when I do put highlights on, they feel like they belong, right? So the area around the highlight, of course, has to be kind of finished before the highlight will feel at home. And then what I tend to do is like put the highlight on, I sort of like make a little dotted line or whatever and then blend it in a bit. These pants are not supposed to be like super shiny or very like wet necessarily, so that's why I'm not concerned about having like really bright shiny highlights. Now, when I get into an area working a hand, it's kind of the same thing. It's all the same principles, painting flesh. It doesn't matter. People always ask like, what is the mix for skin color, which is the most naive question, really. But what I'm just trying to do is like dot out where the highlights are going to be and then kind of blend them and things like that. The main thing I would say about this area of the painting is if the hands aren't right, you can pretty much throw away the entire piece. Even if the actual surface area where the hands are is like 1% of the entire painting. Hands have to be right. I've seen so many paintings, even in galleries, where like the artist is like a successful gallery painter, and then oftentimes there's cut corners with the hands, and we see our hands and other people's hands like all day every day, so we know when it's just not right. So it has to be structurally right. What I'm doing here again is oiling out like right up to the edge of this little shirt. So I'm like oiling out in an extremely specific way before I work on the arm, on the shirt area, which is pretty much finished. And what is this? Mars Black, I think. Yeah, so again, I'm going over this area now in a way that is very thin. So a clean brush, nothing in it, and I'm just going to, once I apply it and start to block it in, I'm making sure there's exactly the right amount of paint in that area so that it looks super dark and opaque without having like mountainous ridges of paint. This area, of course, looks way too orange right now, so you get your closest kind of guess and then adjust it, mix some new paint, get it on there, keep working it in, and then of course again like zoom, skip a few 99, 100, and then the next part is like way zoomed ahead. So actually off camera, before I got to this point, I had to make the hand smaller, like a few millimeters smaller, which would be like the equivalent of almost 2 centimeters, like in the actual hand scale size of this figure, because it didn't look right compared to the size of the other hand. It was way too big, but the reference image actually really did look like that. So I think that was a focal length thing, where even though I had a bit of a longer focal length on my lens, it was still distorting it a bit. So that's why I always like to draw things in the beginning and try to get them as close as I can, and then apply paint after that. Now here I'm oiling out the hat area in the way that I did before, bending down to make sure where it is in the glare, just so I can see it. Obviously it'd be a little bit easier to get a flashlight. I do that sometimes with the larger painting, but I'm just really trying to make sure that I take care of the surface, so I create a painting that does not rely on varnish in order to look great the whole time through. So once I start painting this part, of course, I'm just blocking it in the ways that I always would, with a green that happens elsewhere in the painting, which just makes sense. I'm trying to get through the block in as fast as possible so that I can spend more time on the actual finishing. That's where I think a lot of people get hung up, is that they spend way too much time in the block in, and then they run out of stamina by the time they get to the detail part of the painting, which is really tough to do in one alla prima session. You need energy for the end, so you get through this part as quick as possible and then save all of our motivation for the next parts. And here I'm correcting that beginner mistake of making a line too dark when it's surrounded by a lot more light. It's supposed to be more pleasing to the eye, of course, and it does happen in photographs as well when there's a limited key, so this would be like a high key area. Some photographers might think about the term dynamic range. Some artists have used the term value compression. It's really just realizing that when sometimes we think we see a dark line, it's actually not that dark when it's surrounded by lighter areas. So this hat is not supposed to be like extremely shiny and bright in that area, but it's still, I'm just like trying to work it in. I keep working it in, and then again, 1, 2, skip a few. A lot of time off camera. And yeah, so this is pretty much just about finished now. I'm not even sure if I did more after this to the hat. I think I did, because some of those dark areas still look a little bit too unfinished, but here it is. Well, that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, let me know. I love comments. If you did not enjoy it, also let me know, because I want to improve and grow and change just as I do in my art practice. Check out Buy Me a Coffee. That's one way you can support this channel in the meantime, besides watching it and telling your friends. And what else? I don't know. That's about it. See you later. Thanks for watching.